So good evening and welcome to this presentation. My name is Mike Emery and I'm the site administrator of the Cornwall Iron Furnace, a historic site which is owned and operated by the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, Pennsylvania's state agency for history. Our lecture tonight, other than the blue and the gray, Human Interest Stories of the Civil War by Tom Lehman, is brought to you by the Cornwall Iron Furnace Associates, a nonprofit support group that is made up of volunteers from the community. Our lecture tonight will be a hybrid consisting of people in the room here at Cornwall Manor and of course the people at home watching on their computers. For those of you attending in person, we will gladly take your questions at the end of the presentation. And for those of you on Zoom, please send your questions using the Q&A button and we will address your questions at the end of the presentation as well. We are also recording this evening's lecture and we'll place it on the museum's YouTube channel in the near future. I want to introduce tonight's speaker, Tom Lehman. Tom is a resident of Minersvillage who has volunteered as a guide at Cornwall Iron Furnace since 2009. He has had a lifetime interest in the Civil War and has a special affinity for Gettysburg. Tom has been active in learning and teaching about the Civil War for almost 50 years, as he began as a reenactor in 1976. He has led Gettysburg Battlefield tours for students and adults and has been the program chairman for the Hershey Civil War Roundtable. So please welcome our speaker, Mr. Tom Lehman.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. So here, I want to make sure you're paying attention to this presentation because afterwards you got to take a quiz. Okay? And if you get right answers, you get a prize. Okay? So anyhow, welcome. Thank you for coming out in this cold, windy evening. How many of you are veterans? Raise your hand. Okay. So I'm gonna, during the course of this presentation, I might ask a couple questions. So the first question is, how many of you have ever heard of the Congressional Medal of Honor? Raise your hand. Okay, we're going to be looking at 3 individuals that earned the Congressional Medal of Honor during the Civil War, and 2 of them from Gettysburg and so forth. So let's get started with our first one and am I pressing the right one here? Okay. Huh? This one here. Isn't this one?
Here we go, side. Maybe. I'm not going to pass either, I guess.
Okay.
Here, let me just do this. Click.
Okay. The very first one is a man by the name of John Reynolds, Major General John Reynolds from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He was killed 15 minutes on the first day of fighting at Gettysburg. But the story I want to relate to you about John Reynolds is for many years that I've been doing this, there's a myth going around that when you see an equestrian statue on the battlefield at Gettysburg, if 2 hoofs are lifted up, that means the general was killed. If 1 hoof is lifted up, that means he's wounded. Now that's a myth. I can talk to 100 guides and park rangers, and 50% of them will say, yes, it's true, and 50% of them will say it's false. But one thing I do know for sure, that when you see a horse on the battlefield, And if his tail is down, he is ready to charge into action. And if you see his tail up in the air, that means he's ready to discharge. I got a laugh out of this one. Oh, well, good. So, Father William Corby, he was a Catholic priest. And every day before the Catholic, the Iron Brigade, the Irish Brigade, and that would go out in the battle, he would always gather them and pray over them. And this is a rock on the battlefield with his statue there. And this is where he would actually do, they called it absolution, okay? And so on the second day, he gathered the Catholic troops before they went out into battle, prayed for them and so forth. Eventually, he becomes my question is, how many of you follow college football? Okay. So I want somebody to raise your hand. On the night you're my students, okay? So you raise your hand. What is the nickname for the football team of Notre Dame University? Good. Fighting Irish. Okay, now we're going to find out how they got their name. After he got done praying for them, he would always say at the end, "Go get them, you fighting Irish." And that's how they got the nickname. Father Colbert would be one of the first presidents of Notre Dame University at South Bend, Indiana. If you go out to the campus, there's actually the same monument on the campus that you see here on the battlefield and so forth. Now, some of the stories tonight are going to be short, and some of them are going to be a little longer. So let's see. Up in Gettysburg, there's a painted mural on the side of a warehouse. It's 80 foot long, about 15 feet high, and it depicts a scene that took place in this area. It was called the Brickyard Battle. And what it was is, in this area back in that time, there was actually a kiln where they would make fair bricks. And what happened was, on the first day of July, as the Union Army is being pushed back through town to take up their position on Cemetery Ridge, one brigade of Union infantry encounters two brigades of Confederates. Now, when I talk about brigades, we're looking at the numbers here. On the Union side, a brigade was roughly about 1,400 soldiers. On the Confederate side, it was somewhere around 1,600. So in this particular battle, there are going to be over 3,000 Confederates battling 1,500 Union and so forth. You don't hear much about this battle here. You see the monument here, it's the 154th New York Infantry and so forth. There were over 770 casualties in this battle. It only lasted about 50 minutes. But one of the gentlemen that they found near this battlefield, near where this battle took place, they were trying to identify the Union soldiers after the battle was over. And they came upon a Union soldier that they had no identification on him. But the only thing he had was in his hand, he had a picture of these three kids. So a doctor by the name of Dr. Bournes from Philadelphia, who was here helping with the wounded, went back to Philadelphia and had this picture printed in all the northern newspapers, particularly the Philadelphia Inquirer, the New York Times, and so forth. And eventually, this picture, a copy of this picture got up to Oswego, New York. And when it got there, a gentleman recognized the picture, and he took it to a woman. Her name was Flaminia Humiston. And she contacts Dr. Bournes and says, That's my husband. He was so taken by this incident that he actually began raising funds to start an orphanage, a soldier's orphanage in Gettysburg. And he raised enough of money that Fliniia was the first mistress of that orphanage, and the 3 children were the first 3 children in this orphanage. Okay, now in the 10 years that the orphanage was in operation, there was roughly about 130 children that went through this orphanage. But 3 years, this orphanage opened up in 1870. And 3 years later, Fliniia gets married and moves to New York. Well, Dr. Borns has to appoint a new mistress. And up until this time, the orphanage had a very good reputation. He hires a woman by the name of Rosa Carmichael. Well, when he hired her, excuse the language, all hell broke loose. There were reports that while she was the mistress, that children were being abused. And the Union, the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, investigated her abuse. And eventually, she was arrested and fined $20 and asked to leave town. Well, she went back, she paid the fine, went back to the orphanage, not without them knowing this, and continues to operate there for a while. Now, when I say she was cruel, here's a couple of the stories. One time, there were some people walking near the orphanage on Christmas Eve, and it was very cold, and they heard some crying from an outhouse that was near the orphanage, and it was locked. When they broke the lock open, here was a young boy sitting in that outhouse in underwear, and here she was punishing this boy for misbehaving. Down in the basement, there are chains where she would chain the children to the walls, and they would not be fed for days. And there were actually tubs of water where she would make the children stand in the tubs of water, and eventually, as their legs get weakened, they ended up drowning. Eventually, again, they find this all out a little bit too late. They claim that there were roughly about 15 children that were unaccounted for while she was there as the mistress there and so forth. This is a picture. This is what it looks like today, and that's what it looked like back in the 1860s. You actually can go in there and do a tour. There's a woman that dresses up and portrays Rosa Carmichael. You can get to meet her personally, and you can meet the undertaker that worked there and so forth. And this is one of my favorites. Jack Hinson. He owned a plantation in Dover, Tennessee, a 400-acre plantation. He had roughly about 80 slaves that were working for him. Now, the plantation was bordered on the Cumberland River, and on the other side of the river was Tennessee. So, yeah, Kentucky and Tennessee. Well, anyhow, he was very neutral to the war. He was very good friends with Grant. Grant actually came to the plantation, and let me there's what the plantation looks like, the house, the main house, and that is Jack Hinson writing, and we'll talk about this in a second. He was very neutral. President Grant was a very close friend to him. He had come there several times to have dinner with the Hinsons. The Hinsons had 8 children, 6 boys and 2 girls. And he was 55 years old, Jack Hinson, when this takes place. So one day, two of the boys decide they're going to go on a hunting trip. And they rode off, and they rode on their property, and they rode down toward the river. And as they were riding, they were encountered by a Union patrol. And the Union patrol saw these two individuals, and they saw they had rifles. So, of course, they thought they were spies. Well, they hung them. Okay? Then they took their bodies into Dover and tied them behind horses and rode them through the whole town, dragging these two men behind them. And then eventually they cut their heads off, put them in burlap bags, and stuck them on the post of the plantation. Now, if you were Jack Hinson, the father, what would you have done? Okay. Well, he told his wife to take the children, cross the Cumberland River, and he'll be okay. Well, eventually he has a special 50 caliber rifle made, and there was a cave on his property, which was about 300 yards from the Cumberland River. And he could see down into the river. And that river was being used as a supply line for the Union Army. The problem was when you got to certain sections of that river, they called them chutes. That meant the water was running the opposite way. Instead of north to south, they were running south to north. So when the supply boats got to these chutes, they had to slow down to get through these chutes, and these chutes could be anywhere from a half a mile to a mile and a half. Well, he became what I considered to be the first American sniper. What he did was he wanted revenge for what happened. And sure enough, he got his revenge. The first two individuals that he killed was the man that hung his two boys, and then the man that brought the heads and put them on the post. Eventually, he had 130 kills. He had 38 notches on his rifle, where each one of those notches represented an officer that he shot and killed. And all during this time, now, Grant being his friend, now Hinson is his enemy. He is on Grant's top 10 wanted list. He's number one. They never did capture him. But what Grant did to retaliate was he burned the plantation down, everything. The only thing that was left was a few of the slave quarters. He did not do any harm to them, but he definitely destroyed the plantation and so forth. When Hinson eventually comes back, he sees that the house has been destroyed. He only has two children left. The two daughters became very ill. They died. And three of the other sons enlisted into the army, and eventually they were killed and so forth during the war. This is a picture of Joseph DeCastro. He was with the 19th Massachusetts Infantry, and during Pickett's charge, he was a flag bearer, and you can see him there with his flag. And eventually, during Pickett's charge, he sees the Confederate infantry coming toward him, and he sees a flag bearer from a Virginia infantry. They go out and they start battling with their staffs and their flags, and eventually he kills the flag bearer. Takes the flag, takes it back to his commanding officer, hands him the flag and says, "Here's your flag, sir," and he goes back out on the battling again. What's unique about this, now this is one of the first Congressional Medal of Honor winners. He is the first Hispanic to win the Congressional Medal of Honor and so forth. Sachs Bridge. This is a bridge located right near Eisenhower's farm. If you go past Eisenhower's farm on Pumping Station Road, you cross one bridge, will be run, and then you cross the second bridge, which is a little bit longer, and that's Marsh Creek. As soon as you cross that creek bridge, you look to your left and you see this one. The unique story about this bridge was, now this bridge was used by both the Union and the Confederates. When the war started, the Union Army crossed that bridge to go into Gettysburg. When the Confederates were retreating, Lee used this bridge to retreat from. The story about this bridge was that there were 3 Confederates that were trying to desert the war. They wanted to quit. So they put on Union uniforms and they joined the ranks of the infantry that was taking charge of this bridge at this time. Well, let me tell you, they dressed the part, they looked the part, but this is what gave them away. How you doing, you all? Okay. When they heard him say that, they took him and they hung him from the rafters. And some of the stories is, now this is supposed to be one of the most haunted bridges on the east coast of the United States. Paranormal said people hear horse hooves going across the bridge. They can smell cigar smoke. Matter of fact, that there was an article where a man put a cigarette on the railing at the bridge and the cigarette started spinning in a circle and so forth. So that's Sachs Bridge. Now this one here, James Cumberson. Now, before I go any further, when I started doing some research on this, and I want to thank Mike Emery for helping me put these pictures together for this program. This is one of the men that we were trying to locate a picture of, the James Cumberson. Well, Tuesday of last week, Gene and I went down to Gettysburg, and we stopped in at the Adams County Historical Society, and what do you think they had on display in the display case? An exhibit of James Cumberson. So I had to pay, and they made these 2 pictures for me. And I have to tell you that these pictures were loaned to the Adams County Historical Society by the name of George Morton. It's his collection of pictures. And this is a picture of James Cumberson. Okay, so let's talk about James Cumberson. He was in the 1st Pennsylvania Reserves, Company K. He was fighting in the Wheatfield area. Okay. While he was there, if you look at me, a bullet went in right behind his right ear and came out his left temple, went all the way through his skull. They take him to the field hospital. Now, he did not respond, so they presumed that he was dead. So they put him in a tent at the field hospital with the rest of the dead bodies. 48 hours later, he wakes up. And he wakes up and he gets enough of strength to walk 7.5 miles to Emmitsburg, Maryland, to his home. And he lives until he died in 1917. He applied for pension with the federal government because of his wounding at Gettysburg, and the federal government approved the pension and so forth. That's the monument at the Wheatfield of the 1st Pennsylvania. Okay, here's my question to you. And y'all can, when you were growing up and so forth, what was the worst maritime disaster that ever happened in American history? What's that? Okay, how many would think it would have been the Titanic? Raise your hand. Okay, well, nah, that's not true. That's not true. You see the Sultana? This was a 260-foot side wheeler, and it was actually docked at Vicksburg to get some repairs on a boiler. Now, they recommended the boiler to be replaced, but the man said, no, we're just going to patch it up and we're okay. Well, while he was there, two gentlemen, a man by the name of Captain Speed and Captain Hatch, approached the captain, his name was Mason, and said, hey, would you like to earn $25,000? Well, this is back in 1865. And he said, sure, what do I have to do? Would you be willing to transport over 2,000 prisoners back up north to Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, wherever they came from, and drop them all, and you can make $25,000 for doing it? Sure. Well, okay, good. Now, besides the 2,000 prisoners, he also had 100 horses. You can see the horses up in the front here, and 100 mules, 100 pigs, and 250 bags of sugar that he got delivered to Memphis, besides the prisoners. You can see them standing around the deck. They claim that each prisoner had a 2x2 space to stand on. The full capacity of that ship was only 357 people. Now, besides the 2,000 prisoners, they had 24 guards. They had 70 paid passengers, 50 of them being women and children, and a crew of about 87. So roughly they had about 2,400 individuals on a ship that only could handle 300 and some number of people. They leave Vicksburg, they get up to Memphis, Tennessee, they dock there to unload the cargo, and most of these prisoners were malnutrition, very weak. But while they were at Memphis, while they were unloading, the men that were able were allowed to go into town and get food for themselves and then come back on the ship. Okay, fine. On April 27th, 2 o'clock in the morning, the ship leaves Memphis and goes up about 6 miles up the Mississippi River, and the boiler they repaired actually explodes, and then it caused the other 3 boilers to explode also. Here you can see the men in the water, jumping off of it and so forth. This is what it looked like when it was being destroyed. They saved 870 some people from this ship, but eventually over 350 would die from hypothermia and other injuries. The total number of people killed on the Titanic was 1,537. The total number on the Sultana was roughly over 1,875, and so forth. Alan Fraser. Here's a boy. He was staying at a relative's house in Gettysburg, a man by the name of Solomon Powers, and a man by the name of John Briggs from Philadelphia came up to get his remains of his son that was killed here at Gettysburg, and also to hear Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address. And while Mr. Briggs was here, they don't know if he found this or if he bought an artillery shell. But he found out that the artillery shell was still loaded. So he had to disarm it. So the first thing he did was he actually took a file and started filing the the top of the artillery shell, and eventually he can't get it. He goes over to a rock, and he starts banging on the rock, and Alan Fraser says, "Sir, you shouldn't be doing that. That's going to be dangerous." And eventually what happens is the shell explodes, a piece of shrapnel goes into Alan Fraser's stomach, and he actually is mortally killed with the shell. He was only 13 years old. Okay. Mr. Briggs, both his hands were mangled from the explosion, that he had to have both his hands amputated. He was also blind in the right eye, and he was totally deaf. And he lived under those conditions for almost 17 years like this. By the way, I also found out, I was told that he was the only child that was killed by an accident during the Gettysburg campaign. Well, that's not true. I found out that a James Culp blew himself up with an artillery shell, and he was the first cousin of Wesley Culp and William Culp. He was 16 years old when he died. Elizabeth Thorne, now this is a special one for the women, okay? You see the Evergreen Cemetery here. That's what it looked like then, and then the modern way it looked. Her husband and her grandfather actually ran this cemetery. And it's actually located on the other side of the National Cemetery. This is where Jenny Wade's buried and so forth. Well, her husband is enlisted into the Army, so it's only her and her grandfather to take care of the cemetery. Well, she was asked by the Union Army that she would be willing to bury about 120 Union soldiers in that cemetery. And she said yes. Okay, now for you women, here's the circumstances. She was 7.5 months pregnant when she dug the graves. How do you think that was on her? That had to be stressful. I mean, and so that's the statue in the cemetery. You can see the shovel there that's on the side and so forth. On the back side, you can see bullets laying that she uncovered. All right, this is my favorite one. Daniel Sickles. Okay, now I know there's a school teacher here, Mrs. Laverne Longenacker. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question. When you went to school, or when you were growing up as a kid, if you were told to do something, did you ever say, no, I'm not going to do it? Raise your hand and don't be bashful. I know every one of you did it. I know I did it. Okay? Well, this is what happens with Daniel Sickles, okay? He is supposed to be positioned up on Little Round Top. He takes his whole corps. The corps was roughly about 15,000 troops, brings them down along the Emmitsburg Road and around the peach orchard and so forth, the wheat field area and so forth, because he didn't want to just stand there doing nothing. He wanted to be into the action. Well, eventually, he is surrounded by the Confederate Army of Longstreet's Corps. He loses 40% of his men and so forth. The monument that you see there is where he was sitting on a horse, and a shrapnel exploded near him and went into his right hip, and he had to have his leg amputated and so forth. There you can see him walking without the leg. If you go today down to Washington, D.C., to the Museum of Modern Medicine, you'll see the bone structure of that leg on display yet and so forth. Okay? He was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, okay, for his actions at Gettysburg. But this man was quite a character, by all means. He was 35 years old when he got married. He married a 14-year-old teenager. Okay? Eventually, she finds a lover, a man by the name of Henry Clay II. Okay? Daniel Sickles finds out about this affair in the middle of the day in front of the White House. He sees Henry Clay walking up the street. He pulls a pistol out and shoots him and kills him. He's arrested for murder. He goes on trial, and while he's on trial, his defense attorney says, "My client pleads temporary insanity." This is the first time in American history that temporary insanity is used as a plea. He's found not guilty. Okay? Well, he's fine. And guess what? Him and his wife never got divorced. Okay? Well, after the war, he goes back to New York, where he was from, and he was in charge of appropriating money to have monuments put on the Gettysburg Battlefield honoring the different regiments from New York. Well, guess what? He got caught embezzling $35,000 out of the funds. Okay? But yet he still won the Congressional Medal of Honor. Well, anyhow, what happens is with this man is eventually this man is one of the founders of the Gettysburg Battlefield Association that came upon the idea of starting a national military park. And he was one of the instruments in getting that started and so forth. He became one of their first guides there and so forth. Willie Johnson. Willie Johnson was a drummer boy in Company D of the 3rd Vermont Infantry. His father enlisted in June of 1861, and Willie wanted to be by his father's side, and Willie lied his age, but because of his father being in this regiment, they allowed him to join in December of 1861. He was a drummer boy, and down in the Wilderness Campaign, down in Virginia, that regiment was in fierce fighting, and they were being, the Union Army was being routed. And as they're dropping their guns and running, Willie stands there and he's playing the drum. He's beating away, playing it the whole time. They never harmed him. He was allowed to keep his drum and so forth. And eventually, after the war is over, the veterans of that particular regiment said, "You know what? Willie deserves something in return for what he did there." So they wrote a letter to Secretary of War Edward Stanton, and they asked him if him and Lincoln would review this letter and decide if Willie would be any applicant for an award. And yes, he was. He got an award, the Congressional Medal of Honor. He is the youngest recipient. He was not even 12 years old when he got that award and so forth. This is his grave site and so forth, age 11. And the Bliss Farm. I'm just going to talk about one farm in particular, this one here. William and Adeline Bliss lived in New York. They had 5 children, but because of the extreme cold weather, they lived up near the Buffalo area. Well, you know how that is. Well, 2 of their children died very young because of the cold weather, so they needed to come south. So he buys a 60-acre plantation or farm down here on in Gettysburg. And this farm was actually in the center of Pickett's charge. Okay. And during the daytime, the Confederates would actually occupy the farmhouse and the barn. Then at nighttime, the Union soldiers occupied the barn and the farm. And this farm changed hands about 10 times. Well, on July 3rd, during Pickett's charge, General Alexander Hayes of the Union Army sends a messenger and tells them to burn the farm down, burn it all down. And this is the only farm on the entire battlefield that was totally destroyed, that when the family came back, they had nothing. And when they did come back, they filed a damage claim for $3,800, okay? You had to first submit your claim to the state, and then if the state denied it, then the federal government would look at it. Well, eventually in 1882, the federal government decided that they were entitled to the full amount of money. The problem was both parents had died. So the money went back to the government and so forth. Alonzo Cushing, very interesting man here. He was in charge of artillery. He went to West Point. He was number 12 out of his class of 36. And he was in charge of the Battery A of the 4th U.S. Artillery. He was in charge of 6 artillery pieces. And during Pickett's charge, he moved his pieces up closer to the wall because he saw the Confederates almost finally breaking through with Armistead and so forth. Well, in the process, he had 2 brothers that served in the Union Army, William and Howard Cushing and so forth. Now, what happens here is an artillery shell lands and a piece of shrapnel hits Cushing in the right shoulder. He's fine with that, okay? A few minutes later, another artillery shell explodes and a piece of shrapnel actually rips up his abdomen and exposes his intestines and everything. And the men said, "Sir, we're going to take you off the field. We got to get you help here." And he said, "No, if I'm going to die, I want to die with my men." So he took his right hand, grabbed his stomach, the skin, and held his wound together with his right hand, was still giving orders when the fatal shot came. A bullet went in through his mouth, went through his throat, and went out the back of his neck. Okay? Now, he was only 23 years old, so he had no family. Finally, in 2010, a representative from Wisconsin, and that's where he was from, sent a letter to President Barack Obama and asked him if he would consider presenting Cushing with the Congressional Medal of Honor. And in 2014, that's what he did. Okay, so that's Cushing. The Lincoln Cemetery, very, very odd cemetery. There were over 30 African Americans that lived in, there was over 200 African American citizens that lived in Gettysburg during this time. And 30 of them enlisted in the Union Army. And the 30 of them were killed during the action. So when they decided to put the National Cemetery there, of course, with them fighting for the North, you think they would have been entitled to the cemetery. Well, that's not true. Okay? So let me ask you, and you raise your hand. What was one of the reasons why this war was being fought? Raise your hand if you know the answer. Go ahead. Slavery, okay, that's one of them. State rights, succession, okay? So they were not allowed to be buried in the National Cemetery because the African Americans were still not equal to the whites at this time yet. They're still fighting over this issue and so forth. So a man by the name of Basil Biggs buys this, I think it was like 3.5 acres of land, and two other gentlemen formed a commission. It was called the Goodwill Commission, and they buried the 30 Black African American soldiers in this cemetery, plus all the other Black cemeteries in the town. They dug up all the bodies because the town wanted to put some housing in there, and they wanted the church properties. So they had to remove the Black citizens that were buried in the different cemeteries around town, and they're all buried here. Eventually, an Elks Lodge asked if they could take over the ownership of this cemetery. And it was Elk Lodge 125 Lincoln GAR. That's how it got the name, the Lincoln Cemetery. And Basil Biggs he was given the contract to bury the Union soldiers in the National Cemetery. He was awarded $1.25 per person. Okay. Eventually, he has 12 individuals that are working underneath him to remove the Union soldiers from the battlefield. Now, with that said, though, what about the Confederates that are still laying out there? The Confederates that were dead on that battlefield laid there until 1872, 10 years later, until the women in the South formed a commission to send up a group of men to locate as many of the Confederates as they can find and bring them back home to their homeland. That's the end of the program. Now, we can do the question first, or we can do my door prize first. What do you want me to do, Mike? What's that, the question? Okay, any questions? I fear there won't be too many questions on this, but anyhow. So did you learn something tonight? Okay. Yeah. You have any back there? Okay, so here, I'm gonna ask some, okay, go ahead. Okay, I have to come to you because of the noise behind me. All right. Well, here, I'll answer this question the best I can, okay? First of all, okay, the question is, what was the purpose of the boys as drummer boys? What was their purpose for? Well, let me first give you a statistic. There were 125,000 children that fought in this war that were under the age of 12. And they either were drummer boys or flag bearers, okay? The drummer boys, basically, what they did was they would drum different cadences, and when they heard the different cadences, the troops knew, hey, we got to make a right turn, left turn, retreat, whatever. If you carried a flag, God bless you, okay? Because guess where you were? right out in the front, and the soldiers would always guide by the colors back then. So wherever the colors go, you follow behind that and so forth. So that was their purpose and so forth. Okay, you have it. Oh, yes, sir. Which one? Yeah, let's see. Willie Johnson. He died in 1931. Yeah, 1931. Yeah. Okay. Any other? Okay, so I have some questions. I want to see if you're paying attention. You do not open these envelopes until I tell you. So the first question is, and you raise your hand. I want you to come up here and you pick the person that raised their hand first. You're my go here.
I'll help. I'll be the walker.
What is the name of the covered bridge that we saw? Jeff? Okay.
Goes to him.
Yep. Now you only come in once. Okay. Now these are going to get a little harder. Okay. What was the name of the plantation? I think I gave the name. Oh boy, I hope so. Maybe I did. Okay, we'll see one. What was the name of the plantation that was owned by Jack Henson, the American sniper? Did I say the name of that at all? Okay. Well, it was Bubbling Springs, so I'll hold this a minute. I'll think of another here. What was the name of the man who had the picture of the 3 children in his hand that the woman identified? Oh boy. Oh, I get to keep this one. If somebody can even give me his first name. You're not paying attention. No. Go ahead. You're close. Yeah, Amos Humiston. Okay, now this one ought to be pretty easy. I'll wait till you're here.
All right, go ahead.
What was the name of the ship that exploded with all the prisoners right back there? Yep, he was the first one. What college did Father Corby become president of? Holy schmoly.
I think that's right here in front.
Yeah. What was the name of the drummer boy that won the Congressional Medal of Honor at 11 years old?
Go ahead.
Huh? Who? What's his?
Willie.
Yep. I have Eddie. Okay. What was the name of the cemetery that the African Americans were buried, right? Yep. Here's one. I'm going to give you a minute to think about this one before you answer, because it's nothing to do with the program. Okay. I want you to think for a moment. I'll give you a moment to think about this. How many Union officers became presidents of the United States from the Civil War? How many do you think there were? Now, of course, we know Grant, but how many would you guess? So raise your hand and we'll see. Nope. Nope. I'll give you a clue. It's more than 3. Nope. More. No, you only win once. You only win once. You remember?
You're close, so.
I see you mumbling.
We said 5.
Nope.
Oh, my. Back row?
Nope. Now, let me give you, no, I'll give you the last clue. 5 was not high enough, and 7 was too high. So now.
There we go. 6, there we are.
Okay, in order to get this double, can you name them all? Okay. Okay. I got one to give this one away. What was the name of the mistress at the orphanage that was the cruel? Oh, back there, that woman back there, right?
Yeah.
There you go. When she gets it, when I say, okay, you may open up your envelopes and you can see what your prize is. Okay. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight and so forth. Yes, sir. What's that?
Who were the 2?
Okay, Garfield, McKinley, Chester A. Arthur, Benjamin Harrison, Grant, and is that 6? Okay, yeah. Okay. I want to thank you very much for your time and everything. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you all for joining us for this lecture. I especially want to thank Tom for his presentation and for Kathy Donaldson, Lydia Jones, and Bruce Chadbourne for helping to organize our virtual talk. I also want to thank the Friends of the Cornwall Iron Furnace who sponsored this program, and of course, Cornwall Manor for allowing us to use this wonderful space. Please join us for our next lecture on Tuesday, August 12th, so we're taking a bit of a hiatus, when Mike Weber will give his lecture, Curtis Grubb, Colonial Iron Master and Patriot. Our next event will be on Saturday, May 3rd, when the museum will have its spring open house. I'll feature cast iron cooking demonstrations. This, of course, will be in conjunction with Cornwall Manor's Blooms and More event. So just a reminder, the museum is open Friday through Sunday through tours, so please check our website for details. And if you're so inclined, if you'd like to make a donation, Bruce back there is holding the basket. So this is kind of a reverse Easter Bunny situation where we ask you to put something in our basket as opposed to getting something from a basket. So we thank you, everyone, and please stay safe and good night.